Good morning or good afternoon, regardless of what time it is. Welcome and thank you for clicking on my presentation. My name's Emily and today I'm going to be talking about Northern nursing and Indigenous health. Key messages for this presentation: nursing on a remote reserve is challenging and rewarding. Nursing in the North creates an opportunity to use full scope of practice and learn new skills. Northern remote communities face many disparities related to the social determinants of health. Indigenous people are resilient. Cultural awareness, sensitivity, competence, and safety are crucial for nurses to understand and implement. So a little bit about me. I recently graduated from Laurentian University. I love the outdoors. My passions in nursing include health teaching, substance use and harm reduction, maternal and newborn health, Indigenous health specifically related to access and equity. I work as a community health nurse on a remote fly-in reserve called Wonneman Lake. My 5-year plan is to become a nurse practitioner and focus on improving access to essential services for people living in the North. What drew me to the North? My first experience in the North was in Moose Factory, and that's the picture that you can see Winnebago General Hospital, and that was one of my clinical experiences in school. Some things that drew me to the North are I want to experience cultural diversity, create meaningful relationships with a community, use my full scope of practice, and have a healthy work-life balance. So the bottom picture, you can see me standing with the sign for Wonneman Lake, which is the community which I currently work in. So my new life, I work 4 weeks in the community and 4 weeks out of the community. I'm learning tons of new skills. So far, I've learned how to suture, cast, and prescribe certain antibiotics within the nursing guidelines. I'm on call frequently, so I get woken up in the middle of the night. I have to bring all of my groceries from Thunder Bay, as food prices up north are extremely expensive. And I've been participating in many community activities. So in these pictures, you can see that's what I brought for my first 3-week stint up north in September. Just a little snapshot. And then the bottom 2 pictures are myself and my nurse in charge, Lori. The leftmost picture is us after we went slinging, which is hunting for grouse using a slingshot and a rock. We did not catch the grouse. A local person did, but we posed with the picture. We posed with the bird. And the right picture is us at Halloween. So what is it really like working up north? First and foremost, community members are very welcoming. People are open to teaching me about the culture, and I have learned so much. Nobody is afraid to answer my questions, and everyone's really open and honest about their feelings and experiences. I collaborate with nurses, healthcare providers outside of the community, mostly by phone, but sometimes they come and visit us, nursing station staff, and community members. So here I wrote example beach story. So a great example of the collaboration that happens in communities like this. And while I tell the story, keep in mind that nursing up north is not like your traditional nursing. We don't have other healthcare providers to support us. There's just the nurses. So there's no paramedics, there's one police officer, stuff like that. So there was a person who was unconscious on the beach, and we got a phone call that there was someone unconscious on the beach and we had to go and save them. So the nurses jumped in the car with our security guard and he drove us to the beach, where we found half the community on the beach helping this person. And the community members got this person on the back of a 4-wheeler, drove them to the nursing station, where we continued to provide care and eventually medevac the person out via Orange. So that's just this one example of how the collaboration transcends through the healthcare providers and also community members. I'm learning OG Cree, so some words that I can say. Bonjour is hello, miigwech is thank you, Pijan is come. I'm working on it. There's no MD presence. This means that there's no doctor physically there. We always have a doctor on call. And occasionally, I'd say once a month or once every 2 months, we do get an MD who comes and visits our community. This means increased autonomy for the nurses. My most important tip is to know which resources to use to look for the info you need. This is because you can't expect yourself to know everything, but you have to know where to find everything. So I have tons of resources that I use every day, going through my assessments, going through what medications I need to give, how do I give them, and learning as I go. And I think having a supportive team and being open to learning as you go is really important. We're working in a community like this. How to gain confidence as a new grad working in a remote community. So, first of all, knowledge is power. I read all the time, I ask questions and try to understand the rationale. It's really important to trust your team and get to know your teammates on a personal level and build strong relationships. Teamwork really does make the dream work, and it's important to trust everyone around you to help you learn. I never compare myself to others. I'm running my own race, and always remember that everyone has been new at one point. I trust that confidence will come. We won't feel nervous forever. Just give ourselves time to learn and grow. And back up north, there are limited resources. So, what I mean by that, this is what my new nursing normal looks like. So, what challenges do we see here? Give you a moment to absorb the pictures, and this is when I wish that I had people talking back to me, but I will go through them on my own. So, um, there's an iStat machine. It's the picture that's the white background with the person holding it. That's called an iStat machine. So we do not have a lab. We do not have lab techs. This is how we get stat blood work done. Other than that, we would send blood work to Sioux Lookout or Thunder Bay. But this is how we can get our stat emerge blood work. It's similar concept to a glucometer, but it'll tell us like a trope, CBC, VBGs, etc. Another one of the pictures is weather. So weather can limit our ability to medevac patients. There's something called a low ceiling, which means that the plane can't land safely because the clouds are too low or something like that. So as you can imagine, there's sometimes times when we are restricted and can't ship unstable patients out for potentially even days at a time. So that impacts our ability to provide care and our plan as nurses. You'll see the x-ray. So in terms of diagnostic imaging, we don't have CT, no MRI, nothing. We do have x-ray, but we are not able to put the x-ray onto a computer. It's a very old school x-ray machine, and we get the x-rays on slabs, so they're physical x-ray pictures. So we need to either describe what we see to the MD over the phone, or we can send pictures, like text the doctor pictures of what the x-ray looks like, which is not ideal. Then you see the grapes for $28. It's $28 a kilo or a pound, I don't even know, however they charge you for grapes. But the point of that picture is to emphasize expensive groceries, and poor nutrition occurs pervasively as a result of difficulty affording healthy options. The final picture, I'm sure many of you might not even have a clue what that is, but that is homebrew, which is homemade alcohol essentially. And this is another issue that we see on reserve. So, alcohol and drugs are not permitted on reserve. It's what we call a dry reserve. So, as a result of this, some people opt to make their own. This is challenging because there's an unknown alcohol content, and you also run into the trouble of methanol ingestion. So, methanol is highly toxic, can cause permanent damage to the optic nerve and death, even in quite low doses. Long term use may lead to kidney failure, cardiac and circulation issues, liver damage, nerve and brain damage. These are complications that we also see with type 2 diabetes, which is also very prevalent in our community. And this leads to our population having many chronic issues that we address on a daily basis. Issues faced in northern remote communities. So, first of all, geographic barriers. There's no dentist, no doctor, well, sometimes no surgeon, no physio, none of these, quote, extras. It's just nurses. So it's the norm here for people to have to travel many hours by plane to obtain routine hospital based services. For example, delivering a baby, having an IND, wearing a Holter monitor for 2 weeks, going to a sleep lab, having a knee replacement, anything like this. In the north, this geographical issue is compounded by harsh weather conditions that make travel impossible, sometimes for days at a time. And like I mentioned earlier, there are horror stories, as I'm sure you can imagine. Travel is stressful. There's a financial burden, not always, but there is separation from family and community. Now, this is complicated by COVID because now there's a need to isolate for 2 weeks upon return to community. This puts a high burden on families and community relationships because there's not enough housing to have people isolate independently, so they have to isolate in homes where there are sometimes 3 generations of a family living there, and therefore forcing their entire family to isolate. And this is really stressful for many people. Limited availability of healthcare resources and providers. There's a high turnover of staff in the north. There's providers who don't really get to know the community members because they're in and out all the time. We see different providers constantly. Part of the difficulty in attracting and retaining healthcare providers stems from challenging work conditions, long hours, isolation, and seeing the same people with the same issues over and over and over is something that you'll hear commonly from providers that work in the north. Cultural factors influencing access. So there's language barriers, lack of familiarity with the healthcare system, low health literacy as a result of limited health education, discrimination, power imbalances, healthcare providers having superhero or god complexes, which results in increased danger, intergenerational trauma, and high rates of mental illness. There's also high rates of poverty and unemployment in these communities as there's no industry. There's no opportunity to continue your education and to have jobs, basically. If there's anything else that you can think of, I definitely encourage you to reflect and think of your own ideas related to issues that you think might be faced in the north. These are the determinants of health. I'm sure that you've heard them told to you about 100 times, so I'm not going to go over what they are. I just wanted to highlight that for Indigenous people in Canada, experiences of discrimination, racism, and historical trauma are included as social determinants of health. Colonialism has profoundly shaped the lived experience of First Nations people in Canada. As a result of colonialism, Indigenous people have faced social, economic, and political disadvantages. So I'm going to go through the determinants of health and give an example of how this impacts people living in a northern remote community, or First Nations people in general, honestly. So, income and social status. Per the 2014 Health Canada report, the median annual income for First Nations people and people living on First Nations reserve was less than half of that of the total Canadian population, 11,210 compared to 25,767 comparatively. Employment and working conditions. Per the 2014 Health Canada report, the unemployment rate for First Nations people and people living on First Nations Reserve was 25%, compared to the total Canadian rate of 6.4%. Education and literacy. Per the 2014 Health Canada report, 50.2% of First Nations adults or adults living on First Nations Reserve had not graduated from secondary school, compared to 15.2% of the total Canadian population. Childhood experiences, things that touch on this, intergenerational trauma, and that impacts children, low emphasis on education, and high rates of teen pregnancy. Physical environments, there are often many generations living in one house, small houses, often poorly maintained, prevalence of lateral violence, and risk for domestic violence in the home. Social supports and coping skills. The First Nations Regional Health Survey 2008 found that 51% of First Nations people expressed having moderate to severe psychological distress, compared to 33% of the general Canadian population. 13.1% of First Nations adults stated they had attempted to die by suicide, compared to 9% of the general Canadian population. And just to note that this does not include successful suicides, for which the rate is 9 times higher among First Nations people. Healthy behaviors. 63.6% of First Nations adults reported heavy drinking on a weekly basis. 36.9% of First Nations adults reported use of illicit drugs. Access to health services. I'm not going to re-go over this because I previously explained it in this presentation, but same as previously explained. Biology and genetics. So the life expectancy of men is 15 years less for Indigenous men than it is for the general Canadian population. For women, it's 10 years less. And the infant mortality rate is 3.9 times higher in First Nations people than it is in the general Canadian population. Gender, I couldn't really think of anything where gender applies, but by all means, if you can think of something, I encourage you to reach out and help me continue my learning. Culture, the dislocation from culture and identity inflicts profound wounds on individuals, families, and communities. And race/racism, this pertains to colonialism. If you live in a northern city, Thunder Bay, Timmins, Hearst, anywhere North Bay, you would know racism is quite pervasive in these cities where Indigenous people are seen more often. Indigenous people are resilient. After examining the deficits among any population, it is crucial to pay tribute to and highlight the strengths within that cohort. Despite the losses and the damage incurred by Indigenous people in Canada, they have proven themselves as resilient nations. Indigenous people have entered a period of reawakening, evident by the advocacy happening at all political levels and the refusal to just get over it. This is a video that I was introduced to through a course that I took called Mental Health Through an Indigenous Perspective. I really encourage all of you to watch it. It's a great video. It highlights how empowerment stems from within the community and how the Indigenous population is working to empower their people. And it's a really beautiful video. Important definitions. Cultural awareness means recognizing that differences and similarities exist between culture. So learning about the history of colonialism and how that impacts Indigenous people in Canada is an important part of developing cultural awareness. Cultural sensitivity is when we start to see the influences of our own culture and acknowledge that we have biases. This is an eye-opening experience. It truly takes courage and humility to admit to your biases, and in order to overcome these biases and not allow them to interfere with your practice, you need to recognize them and know that everyone has biases, so it is normal. With cultural awareness and sensitivity comes a responsibility to act respectfully. Cultural competence is developing knowledge, skills, and attitudes for working effectively and respectfully with diverse people. It's all about reducing the number of assumptions we make about people based on our biases. I just want to highlight, please remember that cultural competency does not require you to become an expert about every culture. Being open and respectful and asking questions is all about the journey to achieving cultural competence and ultimately cultural safety, which is being free of racism and discrimination and creating an environment where people feel respected, safe, and supported in drawing strengths from their identity, culture, and community. So in creating a culturally safe environment, we would encourage people to express their culture and address patients' needs specific to their culture. The RNAO has a BPG about this, and the CNO also explains this as well. So, call to action. No matter where you end up working or what type of nursing you do, it all contributes to making a huge difference. I thank you for everything you've done and everything you're going to do. You're all amazing and capable of great things. That being said, the North needs passionate and caring nurses who want to make a difference. If you're interested in being part of a community and growing with community members towards health, wellness, and greater opportunity, I highly, highly, highly encourage you to look into Northern Nursing and discover the opportunities associated with it. I would recommend this type of nursing to anyone and everyone. It is amazing. And no, you will all be in my shoes very soon. Keep going, you will get through this. If I had to give you one piece of advice, it would be to ask questions. Never be afraid to admit when you don't know something and seek appropriate help. Pretending to know something you do not is a very dangerous mistake many new and even experienced nurses make. Nobody will judge you for having questions. Most nurses are very keen to answer, and if you find somebody who is not eager to answer your questions, learn your resources and where you can find the answers. That's super important as well. Thank you so much for your time and for listening to me blab on today about Northern Nursing and my experience. I am so excited for you guys to keep on with your journey in nursing, and I hope that you have a great rest of your day. Keep studying for those finals. You're gonna crush them. And we will keep in touch. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions, concerns, or if there's anything that you want to add to this presentation. Bye.